Our chair for this afternoon's panel, The Craft of Writing, is James Engelhardt. He is himself a Southern author, having grown up in Asheville and Hendersonville before doing his undergraduate work in Spartanburg. He has a collection of poems, Bone Willows, and a second collection scheduled to appear next year, Never Just a Game. You can find his poems in many literary journals. James is a lecturer in the English department just down the road at Furman University, where he teaches first-year writing, intro to creative writing, and writing poetry. Please welcome James Engelhardt. And once he's settled, he'll be introducing our panelists. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon, y'all. How you doing? All right, okay, good. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you to the Greenville County Library System, and thank you all for being here on this just gorgeous day. So you could have made many choices, but here you are, and I deeply appreciate that. I'm going to introduce our panelists briefly. We'll dive into some questions that I have for them. As she was saying, there's going to be, oops, my timer's here, okay. We'll have Q&A at the end, and then there'll be time to buy books and have them signed back there at those tables, and that's going to be our afternoon. All right, we're going to start with David Joy. He's a 12th generation North Carolinian who grew up in the Piedmont along the Catawba River, moved away at 18, and has spent the last 22 years 100 miles west in the mountains of Jackson County, but specifically Tuckasegee, North Carolina, with his dog, Edie Munster. Joy is the author of 5 novels, including Those We Thought We Knew, When These Mountains Burn, The Line That Held Us, The Way to This World, and Where All Light Tends to Go, almost all of which were either award winners or finalists. His stories and creative nonfiction have appeared in a number of publications, including Garden and Gun, the New York Times Magazine, and Time. He's the author of the memoir, Growing Gills, A Fly Fisherman's Journey. We talked a lot about fish at lunch. And co-editor of Gather at the River, 25 Authors on Fishing, a book he's spearheaded to raise money for the Cast for Kids Foundation. His work is place-driven and deeply rooted in Appalachia and has been translated into 6 languages, so taking Appalachia all across the world, and apparently in France it's very popular. In 2023, his debut novel was adapted for film as Devil's Peak, starring Billy Bob Thornton and Robin Wright. Welcome, please, David Joy. Raquel Vasquez Gilliland is a Mexican-American poet, novelist, and painter. She was born in West Palm Beach, Florida, and grew up there with her parents, brother, and sister. She studied fine art for many years, both in high school and college, specializing in painting. Raquel earned a BA in cultural anthropology from the University of West Florida and an MFA in creative writing from the University of Alaska, Anchorage. And she has 2 poetry collections, this you might not have known, Dirt and Honey and Tales from the House of Vasquez. Her debut YA novel, Cia Martinez and the Moonlit Beginnings of Everything, was published in 2020. I think that's up here. Her second YA novel, How Moon Fuentes Fell in Love with the Universe, was published in 2021. Her debut adult novel, Witch of Wild Things, was a USA Today bestseller, one of Amazon's best romances of September 23, and a People magazine romantasy pick. Her next adult novel, Lightning in Her Hands, is available now, and the third one in the series is coming soon, right? Mm-hmm. Awesome. She's most inspired by fog and seeds and the lineages of all things. When not writing, Raquel tells stories to her plants, and they tell her stories back. She lives in Tennessee with her beloved family and mountains. Welcome, please, Raquel Vasquez Gilliland. And the third member of our party tonight is Glennis Redmond. She is Greenville, South Carolina's inaugural poet laureate. Yeah. Thanks, Raquel. She's a Baldwin Fellow for 24-25 and an American Academy of Poets Poet Laureate Fellow for 2023. She was chosen as a citizen diplomat with the Jonathan Green Maritime Cultural Center. Glennis earned her BA at Erskine College and her MFA at Warren Wilson. She is a veteran Army reservist. She has published 7 books of poetry. Her latest books are The Listening Skin, which is shortlisted for the Open Pen America and Julie Suck Awards, Praise Songs for Dave the Potter, art by Jonathan Green and poetry by Glennis Redmond, and The Song of Everything, a poet's exploration of South Carolina state parks. Glennis received the highest arts award in South Carolina, the Governor's Award, and was inducted into the South Carolina Academy of Authors in 2022. Recent work can be found in Orion, Callaloo, American Poets, the New York Times, and the North Carolina Literary Review. Glennis is the mother of twin daughters, Amber and Celeste, lovely people, and a grandmother, Gaga, to Julian, Paisley, and Quinn. Glennis believes poetry is the mouth that speaks when all other mouths are silent. Welcome, Glennis. All right, so looking at those biographies and doing other research of my own online, I noticed that we've got a lot of different paths here. So Glennis, advanced studies, but not in writing before the MFA. And you come out of spoken word, and your books are from regional, local, indie pubs. I mean, that's kind of true for poetry anyway. That's what we do, right? Raquel, MFA, low residency one, poetry books, as well as adult and YA at big commercial houses. And David, a BA at Western Carolina, go Catamounts, and novels, memoir, also big publishers. So again, a lot of different paths. So would you, just for us this afternoon here, would you take us through your path? How did you discover writing as a calling, a vocation, a practice, a craft? This morning we had, Glennis, the moment when the poetry was read, there was a spark for you, but for all y'all, whoever wants to jump in? I'll call names.
Oh, you looking at me? So I did. I recited a poem that I heard in the 5th grade that was kind of like what Edward Hirsch calls your initiation poem. It's the poem that you first read that just changes your life and your way of being. So I was 11, and then when we moved to South Carolina, I had a teacher who assigned journal writing, 15 minutes every day. I did not want to do it. At the end of the assignment, I kept writing. Long story short, I went on to major in psychology. I was working in a PhD in counseling psych, full ride at VCU, and decided going down Monument Avenue with all the Civil War heroes, I told my professor, I said, I think I'm on the wrong road, literally and metaphorically. And he was very offended because, he was Dr. Strong and he, was a manly man. But he asked what I wanted to do, and I said poetry. And it was like I had hit him in the chest. He's like, "Oh, you're one of those, an artist. I have a son. I have one of them like you at home." Long story short, I went on and still worked in the counseling field for about 7 years, and realized that life was too short not to do what you love when I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. So I had taken a book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, if anybody is familiar with that book. That book was my Bible. It changed my life. I changed my life. And even though people say I come through the spoken word, which is, I started the very first poetry slam here in Greenville in the 90s, because after that I decided, I wanted more diversity as far as poetry was concerned. But I just went on this path of just becoming what I did in the counseling world, I did in the poetry world. So any nonprofit, I was there doing poetry. I was in the clubs doing poetry. I was at churches doing poetry. I was at boys and girls club, just everywhere to do poetry. And I started writing, but it wasn't until in 2000 when the Ku Klux Klan marched in Asheville, 1999 actually, and we did a rally against that. And there were some booking agents in the audience when I did a poem, and they're like, if that's how you do poetry, then we want to book you. So I went national, and people say, how did you get your start? And I said, well, it's the KKK. But I mean, I think it's just, it's so, and I always get back to the mystical part. I was born August 27, 1963, the day before King gave his I Have a Dream speech. That day is the day that W.E.B. Du Bois died. I always had, and then that poem that I recited earlier, all of that has some kind of social justice, social thread in it. And so I got published by, like you said, small presses. I started with one out of Atlanta, then Main Street Rag, then Press 53, and then just of the last 5 or 6 years, a University Press, University of Georgia, and then Four Way Books, which is one of the most powerful independent book publishers, and then working with Good Printed Things here in my hometown, which is wonderful. So I took that path, but I took the path of I want to be a literary citizen. I didn't see anybody doing what I did in the community. I just knew poetry was needed, so I just took it there. And this is, it's been 50 years since I heard my first poem that turned me into a poet. And it's been 30 years of doing this work, what I call boots on ground, taking poetry to the masses. So I feel pretty full circle coming to the library and doing this, because I grew up going to this library, which was the Children's Museum, and I would bribe my brothers to bring me down to get books, and there was no book limit back then, so I could get stacks of books. So this is part of my literary journey, and that's how I got here today, and that's the path I took. But it seems like the editors, and the publishers found me. I wasn't going out looking. They would like send me some of your work, and that's how it's happened. Yeah.
It don't matter.
Okay, sorry. I'm really indecisive about when to speak. Sorry. I'm not really sure when I started writing. I know when I started reading, when I learned in school, and I never stopped. It was like all I did. And I feel like I've always been writing poetry. I think it's something that comes naturally to children in general, singing and poetry. I started to try and get published when I was in my 20s. I have a degree in jewelry design and metalsmithing from the Fashion Institute of Art and Design in LA. I wanted to make jewelry. That was my career path. I found out there that I was allergic to every single part of the process. By the time I had finished the degree, I had no hair on my face and a horrible rash and a horrible cough and psoriasis, and it was terrible. And I was, I had a crisis, and I decided to try and query a book I had written, and I amassed about 100 rejections before I moved on. And I sat down and I was like, how am I going to combine like my poetry and my prose? Because my prose was kind of dry. It didn't have that lyrical quality that I really am attracted to in poetry. And as one does, I said maybe I should get an MFA in poetry in Alaska. And so I did. And I studied poetry, I read poetry, I wrote poetry, almost exclusively poetry for 4 years straight. And the summer I graduated, I wrote Cia Martinez and the Moon Will Be Giving Everything, like with a baby, while nursing a baby. I wrote it longhand. I still have it, like same exact first sentence. And that's how it happened. Something like a recipe in my brain where it's like insert lots and lots of poetry, and then out came out poetic and lyrical prose that actually worked. And that was actually my third novel that I queried. After about 40 or 50 rejections, I was like, something's different, because they're requesting partials and fulls, And then that changed my whole life. So.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a two-part question. As far as where the storytelling came from, I think I came from an oral storytelling tradition, which is to say that I grew up in an environment where children were to be seen and not heard, and you were always surrounded by adults, and they were always telling stories. And to this day, I think my grandmother's the greatest storyteller I ever listened to. But even as a child at church, I can remember coming outside of the church and all the old men would gather around, all the old women would gather around, and I would filter between them listening to stories. I think I realized pretty early on that I couldn't tell a story orally. My mother was a potter, and she would sit at one end of the couch in the living room, and she would be working with clay, and there was an end table, and under that end table was an electric typewriter, and I can remember dragging that out on that shag carpet and turning it on. I can remember the sound it made, the way that that motor heated up the paper, the way that it smelled, and I would tell her stories. And I wasn't old enough to spell, and so she would have to tell me how to spell the words, and I would write these stories. And there's something kind of romantic about all of that. But I can remember, one of my earliest memories is handing something to my father and him reading it and him laughing. And like I said, there's something romantic about that. But like to this day, that's one of the things that I find most magical about literature, is that it's the closest thing to sorcery I can imagine, which is that you're looking at blots of ink on a page and it elicits an emotional response. Like all of a sudden you're dying laughing, or you're on a train by yourself and you're crying your eyes out and people are looking at you like, what's wrong with you? But I think it came from that, the storytelling side. The obsession with language came from music. It came from listening to my dad, play Chris Christopherson on a guitar, or it was from listening to people beat on a lunchroom table at school, and trading around headphones on a Walkman and listening to Wu-Tang Clan 36 Chambers. Like the obsession with language came from that, and I was always writing, and I knew I wanted to be a writer. I always knew I wanted to be a writer, but I had not read the things that I needed to read. And so I went to school to study literature. I wound up where I was going because I was chasing a girl, which is a good reason to wind up anywhere. But that didn't work out. But I wound up studying literature, and I wound up finding my way into all of these writers that kind of changed the trajectory of what I was doing and what I wanted to do. I think something that was fundamental for me too was that everybody always, it's like what Gladys was saying, it's that somebody says, oh, you want to be an artist. Well, how are you going to make a living? Is always the question. Well, that's great, and I hope you do make jewelry, but how are you going to make a living? And for me, my mother was a potter. And so as a child, I spent every weekend packing boxes full of pottery and going from craft show to craft show to craft show, where I was surrounded by painters and sculptors and jewelry makers and potters and people who were making livings from art. And so the question never equated. I thought you're an idiot, is what I thought. There was never any doubt in my mind what I was going to do. And so I just kept doing it. And I had a similar moment to what Raquel said, which is that even that first book I published, it was shit. Like I look back on it and I wish it had not been published. Growing Gills, I mean. And there came a moment where I just kept doing things. And I mean, there was just a definitive shift. It was like suddenly I realized I can do something on a page that very few people can do. And it just took a whole lot of time. As far as the publishing side of it, just kind of sheer luck, which is, that was still the days of self-addressed stamped envelopes. And I just sent a letter to New York and got a letter back saying, send us this book, and I did. And that was that, I think March 3rd was the 10-year anniversary of when Where All Light Tends to Go came out. And that book changed my life. I mean, I'd never been on an airplane. I'd never been anywhere. And now I've been all over the world.
All right. Thank you. That was question number one. And I'm also going to remind y'all that you've got those cards underneath you and pens, or they're nearby anyways. If you've got questions that come up as you're listening that you'd like to have answered, keep that in mind. So lots of ways to become a writer, although I think it makes sense that everybody's kind of obsessed with language. It would be kind of strange if you didn't end up, start that way. And if you're here thinking, I want to become a writer, if you're writing, you're already a writer, it's cool, we'll talk later. So I've heard a lot of variations of, it's amazing how easy it is for the muse to find you if she knows where you are every day, right? So something like that. So with that in mind, would you talk us through some of your writing processes like on the daily? Do you have specific rituals that you follow? Is there a favorite pen or kind of pen, chairs, types of paper, that kind of stuff? Are there particular apps or software that you lean into? Another question that's kind of related to this is, we talked a little bit about this after the last one too. Do you stay with the project until it's done? Like you get on that train and you just keep going till the end? Or do you bounce back and forth depending on like where you can find your mind going on a day? Right?
Yeah, I can go first. So for me, the first like true writer I ever knew was Ron Rash, and like I got to watch him work, and that was kind of when he was in his prime. You know, he was pumping out a lot of work at that point in time, and he was very methodical. So like he sat down in the morning, he read poetry, he wrote poetry. There was always a huge glass of sweet tea on the left-hand side, and he found his way into the work through poetry, and he worked. But every day he sat down and he did that. As a young writer, I looked at him, and that was the only example I had, and I felt very inadequate because I don't work that way. And one day I was reading, the Paris Review has always had this wonderful section called The Art of Fiction, where they interview writers, and it was an interview with Raymond Carver. And he was describing when he's not working. And he said, when I'm not working, he said, it's as if I've never written a word a day in my life. That's me. If you said right now, write a beautiful sentence, I can't do it. You know, I couldn't do it. But he said, when I am, he said, it's you know, it's what John Asbury called the paddle wheel of days. He said, it's just one day dovetailing into the next and into the next. That's very much me. Eventually, I start to discover my process in a way that I understand that, and I start to develop a very deep faith in it. So like now, I think it's very easy to get bogged down with like, I've got writer's block. What do I do? I'm freaking out. I don't give a shit. I'm gonna go fishing, or I'm gonna go climb a tree. I'm gonna go teach my dog to track deer. I'm gonna go do something. I'm gonna read. I'm gonna do something. I don't care because if I worried like that, it would drive me crazy. I have a full faith that the work will reveal itself when it's time to reveal itself, and that I will be compelled to do the work. And I think one of the greatest pieces of advice I could give anybody is to closely examine your process when you're working at your best, and try to have a very deep faith in that. I think Americans have a very bad habit of asking writerly questions that are equational. And it's as if A squared plus B squared minus C squared equals novel. And if I can answer the values of those variables, I can produce what you produced. And I'm sorry, but that's not how it works. You know, I can tell you how I work, and maybe it works for you. They can do the same thing, and maybe it works for you, or maybe you don't work like any of us. And you have to kind of discover that for yourself, I think.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
How do you not freak out and allow the work to reveal itself on deadline?
Well, that last novel was 5 years late on deadline, so. So the first time I was ever working on deadline, I freaked out, you know, because I had never had any money. I'd always been poor. I was trying to really make a go at this, and I felt like it was my one shot. And I worked so hard to hit that deadline, and I did. And then I never looked at the deadline again on any contract I ever signed. And I've had them ask me, how's it coming? But I've never had them come at me and talk about pulling back money or something like that. In the end, they wanted a good book. They wanted a good book. And, you know, I think about, I don't know, Leslie Marmon Silko with Ceremony. That book was almost 20 years late on deadline. Mm-hmm. You know? Yeah. What would the world be without that book? I don't think in the end they care so much about the deadline as they care about the good book, at least for unless you're CJ Box or somebody who they need a book a year, a book a year, a book a year. So for me, I just don't care. In worst case, I go work at the Waffle House or the dollar store or something. I don't care.
I don't know, with poetry, I do tend to write a lot, and I write every day. I think the MFA did like stress like 5 hours a day, and I like that. It felt very natural to me to like, so when I graduated, I still, even though I chose not to go into academia, I still wanted to publish. I held myself to that standard. I wanted to publish. I wanted to be, prolific as far as writing is concerned. My first 3 books, I didn't know what I was doing. I was writing poems, but I didn't know how to put a book together. Those are 2 different things as far as poetry is concerned. But all of that, I take all the books up until the book that I have written, all of that was practice to get where I am today. And I was not in academia at the time. And people do put me in like I don't know, spoken word, performance poet, and I don't really like any of those labels because I feel like I come from a richer, deeper oral tradition than that. West Africa, I come from griots, and I don't know if publishing is something a griot was ever thinking about, because a griot, everybody knows what a griot is, right? It's a storyteller, but more than a storyteller, you're like the historian, for you go from village to village telling a story. And I felt like that's what I was doing early on. And so, but I think being African American, you get caught, if I was in the slam world, oh, she's a slam poet, or she's a spoken word poet. I just a poet, just trying to tell my story. And now, and I used to look at people like Van Jordan, who came through the same, we were some of the first black folks that went to the MFA at Warren Wilson. And I was like, how does he do what he does thematically? Because he has these whole ideas, and I was not with whole ideas. I was writing, here's a poem, here's a poem, here's a poem, what's the thread? And then eventually put all this together. But now, I would say maybe 15 years, into the future, I know now that I'm writing a body of work. I know it's thematic, it's related. So I have 7 projects that I'm working on. I'm not working on all those projects equally the same, but I have top 2 that I'm working on. So we know I'm working on the State Park book, and we know I'm working on the Peg Leg Bates book, trying to leap over to where you are to YA, trying to write a novel in verse. But I become obsessed with the work. And I like it when I can just completely disappear, but I can't. I'm a public person too. I'm doing this literary stuff. So I try to balance that time. But my best time is when I am in my home and I'm not responsible for anybody but myself, and then I'm not responsible for myself. I just go where the work takes me. And that's the best part. And it sounds woo-woo or whatever, but I love that when everything around you starts saying, come right here. And like with Peg Leg Bates, I started dreaming about him. He came to me in a dream, and he had a cream tuxedo. He matched his tuxedo with his peg leg, right? Every time. And he just put his hand on mine in the dream. And I just kind of knew, like, oh, I'm supposed to be doing that. Little did I know all of that was related to my parents went to Fountain Inn Colored High School, where he came from. He was the most famous student, alumni from that school. Everything is kind of like just circles. It just keeps, no matter where I turn, it turns to him. And I just go, okay, well, that's what, I'm on this road. So it's like the formal kind of research, writing stuff. And then it's like wherever you live and wherever you go, whatever you do, somebody's like, you know about Peg Leg? They just come to you. Like, I'm like, why? And, you feel a little bit chosen in a way, And now I'm doing an oral history project on Rosenwald schools with these 80 and 90-year-old folks who haven't told their story. And, I said this before, it's like they're erasing history. They're trying to make it illegal, trying to make, telling my story illegal. But I'm going to do the best I can. And as long as I have breath in my lungs, I'm going to be writing, and I'm going to get better, I'm going to get stronger, and I'm just going to keep doing what I think is important, because people tried to stop me early on. It's like, you've already done that. You don't need to do that. I'm like, what do you mean I've already done it? I don't even know what I'm doing. Most of our history has been lost and is down in the earth, and I have to figure out how to tell it, how to write it, and I take it, personally, like most of us do with our work. So I try to write as much as I can, but I like to disappear when I can. If I can disappear from myself, like I did, what's today, Saturday? Like I did yesterday, writing my ranunculus poem about flowers. I mean, 3 hours went by and I wrote this 10-line poem. And that was like the best. There's no money that can give you that. There's no fame. It's just like, I did this thing. And I called my daughter, you want to hear my ranunculus poem? They're like, definitely not. Nobody cares. They just don't care. But I know that this poem is fire, And, but you're a nerd and you just care about that feeling of this needs to be said. So that's how I feel about it.
I don't have a formula. Every single book requires something different, whether it's because of the circumstances of my life or because the book is demanding to be written in a certain time. I'll give a couple examples. Moon Fuentes. My son was 2 years old when I started that book, and it was on contract, so I had to write it within a certain time frame. I haven't gotten to the point of fuck deadlines yet, but he stopped napping, and that was really the only time I was able to write, was during his naps. So, and he was what's the name of the ocean animal that clings? Yeah.
You said sea otter. Is it a
Sea otter.
I don't know.
That's what he was. I couldn't do anything really with him, which was difficult. And but then I noticed he let me write when he bathed, when he took baths, and so I bought every bath toy available, and I got all the bubble baths, and I fed him dark chocolate, like he had a spa day every day in the bath. And I pulled up the IKEA stool next to him, and I wrote longhand because I was afraid like my laptop would get wet. And I wrote Moon Fuentes only 300 words a day.
Wow.
It took 6 months, and that book needed almost no revision.
Oh.
So it won the Buddha Belpré Award. It's over there. You can see the gold medal on it. And yeah, it was like magic. It like poured out of me, but very slowly. And I have the notebook still, and there's like water splashing on the pages. So that's what that book needed. That's the ritual needed. With Witch of Wild Things, I was stuck on a manuscript for almost 15 months. And I said, you know what? I don't know how to write a book anymore, so I'm going to teach myself. I checked out books called How to Write a Novel, even though it was like my third one, And I read all these craft books, and 2 of them were really helpful. Let's see if I can remember my migraine. Save the Cat Writes a Novel by Jessica Brody, and Paper Hearts, Volume 1 by Beth Revis. Technically, that one's for teens, but I've applied it to everything. So I filled up 3 notebooks. No. 1 big one, not 3, felt like 3. 1 big notebook of notes, character development, charts, worksheets, pitches, summaries. I filled it all up. My son started kindergarten, so for the first time I had childcare. And I sat down, like literally that first day I sat down, I wrote that book in 1 month, and it sold to Berkeley 1 month later.
Wow.
So and they all were not that magical, but every single one needed something different. I just had to be patient with the process.
Can I touch you? Because I feel like if I touch you.
I think part of it's relearning it.
Yeah.
Like so many times, I can't stand when somebody writes a novel and then they teach a class on writing a fucking novel. Like you don't understand. you write a novel, and then you don't know how to write a novel again, and then you sit down and you learn to write that novel. Same, Where All Light Tends to Go, wrote that in a month and a half, and then there was Those We Thought We Knew took 10 years. And sometimes I wrote at night, sometimes I wrote in the morning, sometimes the 300 words a day is amazing.
That is amazing.
And at bath time.
In bath time, like I'll have that image. That's wonderful. I mean, I feel that way with the poem too. If I write a strong poem, then I know that I wrote that one strong poem.
Yeah.
But I think everything up to me wrote that poem. But then again, how to write that next poem, I don't necessarily know how to do it. It's just you're practicing, and I just feel really grateful when I show up and it all shows up at the same time, and I'm like, I got something. And to now get it with a book, like I got something that's great, instead of having it with individual poems. But I still want to touch you, so.
I think it takes fluidity.
Okay, did y'all see that? Y'all feel it? I felt it.
Yeah, I started off by saying there are a lot of different paths, and this is clearly, and I'd like to echo what y'all have kind of said too, which is there's no one way to do this. I have a friend who wrote a novel on her phone while she was commuting on the train in New York City, right? So there's just no one way. If you think there's one way to do it, I was glad that we got 3 very different answers, because that's what I was hoping for. Thank you. And what we've been talking about is we think of writing as a very solitary activity, except maybe at bath time. But there's also a community that are always around us, right? People who are either, we try out our first drafts with, or some kind of support, people who you go to for feedback, people who motivate you in one way or another. So talk to us a little bit about the community that is around you as a writer and how they help inform, participate, however you want to think about that.
I can go first. I moved to Johnson City in 2019 with my son who hadn't yet started school. So we were pretty isolated there. And once COVID restrictions were lessened, I said, I need to meet writers. And so I got in touch with the local independent bookstore called Atlas Books. And I said, hi, I want to start a writers group. And can I please have access to your newsletter email subscribers? And they said, here you go. And so I started one, and it's been going for 4 years now. We meet monthly, although, I've been really busy in revision hell, so I haven't gone in a couple months. And other people sort of have taken the initiative, and how they meet is 1 month we sit and do what they call write-in. So we all get together and write for an hour or hour and a half, and then share if we want. And then the next one is we submit pieces for critique, like workshopping. So they alternate that. And that's been really awesome. And I felt like I had something to add to that, and I think it's, that's right. I started a romance book club, and that might not seem like a place where creative people I don't know, maybe you wouldn't think that, but it's amazing for community building, even though we get together and laugh our asses off about dragon dicks and things like that, because what we're reading is silly, but also we talk about amazing things, and I've met amazing people, and I make really large charcuterie boards, and so we eat chocolate, fruit, nuts. They bring cakes and pies and things, and it's mostly women. There is one guy who comes who never reads, and he likes the cheese, but we get together and it's almost like a ceremony where we engage with the sacred profane. Now, I think women, especially, we know about that. We make all these jokes that are not disrespectful, but they are very funny, and laugh until we cry. And I just found just being in that environment of healthy community and like eating lots of cheese is helpful. It makes me feel so inspired and like so connected. And I think that's important for creative health.
Community of writers has changed throughout my process. Like, early on, when I lived in Nashville, there was, we had a writers group of 3, and we met all the time at each other's homes, mainly my home. And I found that productive. But as a touring person, I was touring like 8 months out of the year. It was really hard to have that consistent touchstone. But I was always craving, as being a Black person in mostly white spaces, I was really craving being around people who really understood my work in a way that I didn't have to explain it. And even when I went to Warren Wilson, I felt like my poems were like, they didn't understand the background. And so I craved that and got into Cave Canem, went to Furious Flower, and had those kind of connections where I felt like my work was being listened to in a very respectful way. I didn't think they were being disrespectful, but it was just a level of education that had to come along with what I was trying to do. Now I don't really look for a group. I really try to just find time to write. I just feel like being what I call a literary citizen, I'm giving so much outwork that I really want to be working with myself. And then, so the community comes into, like, the book, The Listening Skin, that was published by Four Way Books. It really became the editors. And I mean, that book was to me, it's a community endeavor when you're going through a book and you're going through it. I don't know how many passes we go through that book, and it made the writing stronger. So it's just at different times I need different things. When I wrote this chapbook, and it's called The Three Harriets, it's about Harriet Jacobs, Harriet E. Wilson, and Harriet Tubman. And that book came out of working with 2 university professors at Delaware. One's a scholar on African American lit, and another one was a teaching artist at the Kennedy Center, but did dance. So I would write my poems at home in my room or wherever I was. I'd never write at a desk. We never talked about what the exact thing was. But I had this beautiful office that I made and never wrote a single poem in that office or at that desk. But I would write these poems and then send them to the professor who taught dance. And then they would take the poems and turn them into dance, the undergraduates. And those are the kind of like more collaborations than writing groups, but it also spurred the work along, and they were needing the same thing I needed. Like, how are we gonna tell these African American stories that have not been told? So that's the kind of community that I've been working with for the last decade.
Before I turn to you, David.
Yeah.
It is about 1:15, so if you've got questions that you want to hand off, you can see Nathaniel and Elizabeth and Carly moving around. And I don't know, I feel like we should have a collection plate. So, David, your community.
I ain't got one. I think I've always felt like an oddball. I get asked this, that question gets thrown around a lot, and I always feel like I'm the only person that I ever hear answer this way. I don't want one. I don't want to be around other writers. I don't mean, like, I've loved our time today, but the things that I enjoyed.
You say that now.
The things that I enjoyed had little to do with outside of our conversations about books. And that was us as readers. That wasn't us as writers. The things that I enjoyed were our conversations about food, or when I asked you the question that I asked you. Those types of conversation interested me. I don't share it's always been something that is private to me and that is sacred to me and that I want wholly for my own. I don't wish to share it with anybody. I think the other thing that is different is that so often writers find their way into the academy in some way or another. That so many of them are academics. And so often what I see, especially with novelists who are trying to write working class novels, is that they don't have the language. They're not surrounded by people who talk like that. And so it's like the dialogue ain't right, the language ain't right. And so it was like, for me, the things that inspire, the people that inspire me are in a different place. And so it's like whenever the writing didn't work out, I would go work on a construction crew, or I'd go work on a goat farm, or I went and did those things. Or like, so for now, every Thursday and Friday, I go sit in an old gun shop and I'm surrounded by a bunch of old men who are just telling stories. It's listening to that. Those are the things that always wind up inspiring me to write. I just don't desire that. And I understand it. And again, it goes back to that idea of process. And for some people, it's necessary, and for other people, it's not. And I think learning that thing about yourself and then feeding that thing are important aspects of, you know, if you need community, seek community, because it's most assuredly there. If you need to write every day, write every day, you know. You do the things in order to get the work done. It's that there's a million ways to skin a cat, you know.
Just to kind of expand on that a little bit, I was once driving Billy Collins and Stephen Dunn, so two poets around, and the whole time we were driving, going to different places, probably an hour in the car, they talked about baseball, they talked about food, and it reminded me of our conversation at lunch today too, where, and after a while I was talking with them about it, they said, yeah, you've got to engage with life. If you don't have anything else to talk about but the poetry, what are you doing?
It's bad poetry.
Right. Yeah,
It's all the people who talk like that. The writing's always bad. It's bad.
Okay. Thank you. We have lots and lots. We'll never get out all of these, but I thank you for your enthusiasm and support. So the first one here at the top that has been given to me is, what is the main reason you write? What do you want? What makes you most proud of your success? Or I guess another way to think about that is there a piece that you can point to as, like, it might not be the one that's gotten the most attention, but the one that feels like you're the one child that you do love more than the other?
That was a lot of questions.
And it's just a little bitty paper, but yeah.
Yeah.
Can you repeat the first two?
Sure. So why do you write? What do you want out of the writing? And then is there a piece of writing that you're most proud of?
I'm most proud of Cia Martinez because I wrote it while nursing a newborn, pretty much. I don't know how the hell I did that. And why do I write? What an odd question. Not that the question is odd, but the answer is hard. So I've been trying to decolonize the way I view time. My grandmother is a curandera, which I said earlier. She's a shaman. Part of what she does is she heals and travels in dreams. So once my family tried to keep a tragedy from me, and she came to me in a dream and spilled the tea, and my mom was very unhappy about it. So she does things like that, and she's been teaching me. And the thing about dreams is that you're more accessible to time, different times, as though they are autonomous and have desire. And so since I started dream work, I've been visited by different times. You know, yeah, yes. yeah. It's an indigenous, it's a old ancient practice, and it's amazing, and I'm really excited to keep working on it. And I'm trying to figure out how was this going to answer the question, though. What was the question I'm answering again?
Why do you write? What's your main reason for writing?
Okay, yes. I feel as though when the book ideas are similar to when I'm visited by times, they are autonomous and they are asking to be put into words. And sometimes I think they're the same thing. I think the time and the story that comes with time is the idea for the work or the art or the poem, and that's, I mean, Cia Martinez is probably one of the most solid forms to come to me. I was walking my son. He was a baby, and I looked at the sky, and I saw, in my mind's eye, a UFO in the sky, and I knew a crash in the desert, and I knew inside was a woman who had been an undocumented immigrant, and she was looking for her daughter. Like, that's what came to me. It walked into me, and so that's strange, isn't it? That's why I have to write. I didn't answer all the questions, but you guys
fine,
can
yeah.
go for it.
I was wondering if I could respond in poem form.
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
I write because I am trying to save my life, and I'm writing to avoid erasure, and I'm writing to the cultural shock of being an Air Force kid and a Southerner at the same time. So I'm just going to share a poem. Is that okay with you guys? I'm just going to, Out of the Listening Skin, which is one of the books I think I'm most proud of, but I'm by the time, you get sick of, I'm sick of my work. I'm sick of the book because I'm on to the next thing, but this poem right here, and it's called You Know You're Not From Here. You know you're not from here when your dad retires and announces, we're going home. When South Carolina is just a concept, not a place. When it would never dawn on your parents to preview or set the context for the South. When they just load all 6 of you into the 97 Ford Puce Green Chevy Nova and head south on I-95. When you are eyes wide and full of questions, when you see a Sambo displayed on a roadside billboard. When, as an Air Force child raised elsewhere, you do not understand the color lines at basketball games or Sunday mornings. When you wake to charred and smoldering grass from a cross burned in your neighborhood. When you see a plantation for the first time and you're not awed by its beauty, but haunted by the slave cabins not included on public tours. When you learn to navigate the historical landmines. When your steps become fluid dance moves in the margins, and your tongue follows the fluent code, switch and switchbacks, cricks and hollers and down yonders, and when you do not know what the word kin means, but when you've been here long enough, you feel how blood circles back, and when you truly understand Dorothy's decree as doubled edge, there's no place like home. There's no place like home.
Yeah, there was a word you used in our session earlier,
Yeah.
and it was that you felt compelled to do something. And so for me, I think all art is compulsion. I think there's a feeling as if you're going to die if you don't do it. And I think, getting back to the idea of process, everything has been different. I wrote Where All Light Tends to Go because I woke up in the middle of the night and Jacob McNeely was talking. I was working 2 jobs at the time. I went to my first job at 8. I got off at 5. I went to my second job at 5:30. I got off at 9:30. I got home at 10. I made supper. I started working at 11, and I wrote from 11 to 4, and I did it every day until the book was done. And I wrote that novel in a month and a half. It was like stream of consciousness. Those We Thought We Knew was a novel that took, more than 10 years, and it was, the compulsion was entirely different. It was that I feel very conflicted to say that I'm proud to be a 12th generation North Carolinian, but to say that knowing good and well that means that I'm the descendant of enslavers and that I continue to sit as a beneficiary of the system of white supremacy. And I wanted to write a book that forced white characters and by extension white readers into uncomfortable conversations that they refused to have. So like the reason I wanted to write that book was very different, but the compulsion was the same. The book I'm working on now was very similar to that first one, which is I woke up in the middle of the night. There was a girl I was, that I was in a relationship with at the time, and she was sitting in the bed beside of me awake. And I just started screaming, "Give me paper, give me paper, give me paper." And it was that this woman was talking. And the woman told me the opening line. She told me how the opening scene unfolded. She told me the last line of the novel. She told me the scope of it. She told me what she wanted it to do. And about a week later, there was a French novelist that had come to stay with me, and we were sitting outside one day talking, and we were talking about the work of writing. And I was telling her that there are times where it is like work. You know, like with those we thought we knew, that novel took a very long time to write, and to try to get right, and to know that I most assuredly failed in some way or another. But then there are times like that where I didn't do that. It was like a gift. It's hard for me to say that I made that up. I mean, I guess you could argue that the subconscious mind did it or whatever, but that's not what it felt like. I woke up and I could hear her clear as day. As far as the book I'm most proud of, it's hard to say, but it's probably that last one. And it's because I know what I wanted that book to do. And I look around and I see a whole bunch of people who need to be having conversations that they're not having, and I'm glad that I was willing to try. And I'm going to keep trying. And so, like, I'm proud of the work that book's doing.
And that brings us to 4 o'clock. I told you we would not get through this stack of questions. But some good news. First, I want to thank you, everyone, again for being here. Thanks again to the Greenville County Library, to Nathaniel, Elizabeth, especially. There she is. Yes, thank you. Are awesome. Thank you to our panelists again. Great stuff. And the extra good news for y'all is that there are books for sale over there, and then there are tables all around, there are 3 of them, where they will be happy to talk with you about questions you might have had, and to talk about books, and just be amazing. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, James, for being our host and asking us wonderful questions. We appreciate you.